Well, they started out making music under the stairs at their parents' house near Sevenoaks in Kent, performing as Orbital now for 35 years and counting. Brothers Paul and Phil Hartnoll coined the sound of a blissed-out generation, from squat parties and raves off the M25, the motorway which, by the way, inspired their name. Orbital brought dance music into the mainstream. Now they're re-releasing their breakthrough albums. Paul Hartnoll joins me on the line from Brighton. Paul, welcome to Front Row.
Thanks. No, good to be here.
Listen, creating electronic music in the late 1980s, the early 1990s, where did your sound come from? Who were your major influences?
It's got to be people like Kraftwerk, the kind of industrial funk sound from the north of England, people like New Order, Cabaret Voltaire, an Australian band called Severed Heads were a big influence. It was kind of early electronic, or sort of mid-80s electronic music really is where it came from. ZTT Records, The Art of Noise.
Were you also looking
like
across the Atlantic to what was coming out of the States, out of Chicago?
I think it was more New York. It was the electro scene really fired us up, and the whole like high energy disco scene of the music of Divine and Bobby O, things like that, and electro and then that high energy stuff seemed to mesh together and turn into house music and start coming out of Chicago, and then a little bit later Detroit.
Yeah. Initially, when you were signed with Pete Tong's record label, I think you were still working in a pizza restaurant, but I know that changed when you played your debut track, Chime, which we heard at the top of the show. You played that on Top of the Pops in March 1990. Tell us about that night.
Oh, that was so funny. I'd literally given up my pizza job the day before. I saw the rotor. I was supposed to be working on the Wednesday when they recorded Top of the Pops, and I had to, ask for the day off, which was not done in that restaurant. And the manageress literally screamed in my face and grabbed my cheeks and said, "Oh my God, we'll sort it out. Don't worry, go and do it. But you'll always have a job here if you need to come back."
You never did go back to that pizza job.
No, I didn't. But I've always felt like there's that job security in my heart that I could always go back.
You could still go.
Yeah,
and that night on Top of the Pops, I mean, it's an amazing thing to watch back, because here you are. It seems like you're completely bemused by the situation. They've ordered a dancer up for you so that the cameras would have something to fix on. What was it like being on that stage?
It was immensely fun and awkward in equal measure. We'd had we'd been to the bar and had a vodka and orange with Gary Davis. Not, he wasn't drinking
the
vodka
presenter.
and orange, I don't think. Yeah, he presented the show, and he was a big supporter of ours. He used to play Chime every lunchtime in Gary's bit in the middle, but he could only use it as a bed for a competition because they wouldn't allow him to play an instrumental track on daytime Radio 1 at the time. Everything was brilliant. Well, I mean, we loved it so much, and we knew that Snap were going to play after us and do the power. So we just jumped off the stage afterwards and joined the audience and just jumped around to Snap. It was great fun.
One thing that's interesting to notice about the film of that night is that your equipment wasn't even plugged in. You'd been told that you couldn't play live, and you refused to mime along, which ended up being quite controversial. Why was it such a big deal that as an electronic act you tended to play live?
For me, it was always the obvious thing to do, because all the bands that I mentioned earlier were all bands that played live, so I didn't think there was anything else to do. And I came from a kind of more punky background, so I'd already been playing in bands and in local venues and that kind of thing. So it just seemed like the obvious thing to do, really. And we asked if we could play live, but they wouldn't let us. I mean, people had done better protests than us, like Madness and Bad Manners with plastic instruments and things like that. But we just put our plugs on top of the equipment and just fiddled with the plug and played with the on-off switches, and that was it.
On the subject of protests, I think political slogans weren't allowed on Top of the Pops, but that night you did sneak in some graffiti-style text onto some T-shirts that some friends had made for you, the text reading, "No poll tax." So I wonder, how did dance music, rave culture feel like a reaction to the political climate of the early 1990s?
Well, we just decided that we knew what we wanted to do and just went off and did it. And that seemed to absolutely terrify the government and the authorities, because unlike punk, which sort of railed against the system and was shouting and trying to fight the system, we didn't do that. We just all got together in a field or in a club and just did our thing and just said, well, we're not part of what you do. We're going to go over here and just do what we want. And that was almost unheard of. And people didn't know really how to respond to that because it wasn't even something you could fight against with that. They were more like chasing behind us going, hang on a minute, you can't do that. And it's like, well, we're already doing it.
Speaking of that ideal of social unity that you're talking about, the blissed out ethereal vocals of your track Belfast, for example.
Absolutely. I mean, David Holmes was one of the first people in 1990 to invite us to play in, at any club, but he happened to be in Belfast, and we went over and met him and all his friends, and we had such a lovely time. It was really nice, and they were a mixed crowd of Protestant and Catholic people, and they didn't care. Some of their parents would have if they'd have known, but they just were discreet about it and got on with it. And it was lovely to see. And so when it came to naming that track, David rung up. I'd given him a tape of it before I left, and he rung up a couple of weeks later and said, "Oh, we really love that track." And I just thought, wow, we're going to just name it after you lot then, because it was so lovely. It was such a it was such a different experience to the experience that we were told you would get being from England, going to Belfast in the early 90s. It just wasn't what the media was saying about, Belfast.
It's interesting you saying that the authorities were sort of chasing after you. The Criminal Justice Bill was a piece of legislation that tried to ban a genre of music, rave music, quote, wholly or predominantly categorised by the omission of a succession of repetitive beats. This bill passed under John Major's government in 1994, widespread demonstrations against it. What would you say was the impact of that bill on rave culture and on the music itself?
I think a few sound systems lost their PAs, but apart from that, I don't think it really did much at all. I think people just got cleverer and moved into slightly more secret places. Maybe went overground a little bit more, had to legitimise their things. But, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? Because all music with a rhythm is a repetitive beat. So it's like almost like a ban on music, which was totally ludicrous, but it just shows the level of fear that they had for what was going on with dance culture at the time.
Take us back to how it all began then for you. You were 16, you and your brother Phil were working on your dad's building company, I think, as bricklayers. You were playing guitar, Phil had brought a drum machine home. How did you then break into actually making music with, I think, a £2.50 tape recorder?
Well, no, actually, but to make the demo of Chime, I think it was £3.50 to buy a metal even more expensive. It was the most expensive cassette I'd ever bought, and I remember buying it and thinking this better be worth it, which it was. But we just kind of got together. I had my guitar, he had his drum machine, which was bless him. We didn't know what we were doing. He bought a Latin percussion drum machine. It didn't even have like regular drums on it, but we still loved it, and we used to distort it and mess around. And then he got a real drum machine, and we just used to jam around. And then as we were doing that process from the mid 80s, house music came along around 87, 86, 87. We started hearing it, and I remember thinking, oh, right, I'm just going to have a go at this. I need to do it my way. This isn't quite right. And just started making music, but making it a bit darker as well at times. Is there something that I felt was missing? I wasn't really into all the loved up vocals and pianos.
And that lovely squelchy sound of the Roland 303 bass synth, which was such an integral part of that sound. Talking of the brother relationship, you are not the first or the last brothers to form a band together or to go through a few ups and downs. How would you say your relationship as brothers has affected that work together?
I think as brothers you clash at times. We've fallen apart at times. But I think it helps with the getting back together process. I think if you weren't brothers, that might be more difficult when bands fall apart. They often just fall apart. But because you're brothers, you always, there's that elastic family thing that brings you back for, a family occasion. And you just think, what was that? What was the problem before? And you've kind of forgotten it. Or you just think, should we just get cracking again and see what happens? And I think that's it, really. That and a good few years of therapy. That helps, learning to be a more zen person and 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 more forgiving and things like that.
I love
and
that. As you say, Zen person, you do the Zen hand gesture as well. Very, very grounding.
You have to, yeah.
For those who haven't seen you perform live, Paul, you do put a lot of work into the look of your shows, the visuals, the improvisations, plus your trademark head torch glasses. Thinking back to that Top of the Pops gig in 1990 when the show insisted that you have a dancer so that the cameras would have something to focus on, why has theatre become such an important part of what you do?
I think because we are, instrumental. There's not really much to see two people working a studio on stage, which is what we're doing. I'm improvising with the structure of the songs, so it's really good fun. I don't know where it's going to go. The audience and me kind of dictates to you the night as to what's going to happen, and so. I think, with all that going on, it's kind of like the Pink Floyd and Kraftwerk effect. It's like they were bands that kind of knew there wasn't much to look at with them, so they kind of created this big psychedelic background, in the case of Pink Floyd. And Kraftwerk made this lovely futuristic thing. I mean, they were the first band I remember to have video screens behind them. And so it was kind of like, pulling on that, really.
And you're going back to Green and Brown albums. You're playing them both in full. How does it feel to be revisiting that music now?
It's great, actually. It was quite interesting because in so many ways it wasn't any different than writing a new album, preparing it to play live, and then taking it on the road and seeing where it goes with the improvisation. And it just so happened there were 35 years in between writing it and taking it on the road. I mean, I had to buy an old Atari ST computer and find all the floppy disks and things like that in order to get the information, because we never went into big studios. So none of this was multi-tracked. It was all just recorded straight as a 2-track jam onto a DAT. So I had to literally recreate everything. And luckily I'd kept all the old equipment.
Well, Paul Hartnoll, I think you've made a lot of people very happy by doing so. Thank you very much for being with us here on Front Row tonight. Orbital's reissue of their Brown album on vinyl, cassette, CD and digital platforms with 23 additional tracks is out now. The band are live in venues in England over the summer. Phil also playing in Glastonbury next month.